Hi everyone, welcome to my podcast, which is Student to Strategist. Today we are diving into creativity, entrepreneurship, and social innovation with Dr. Miguel, a pioneer in organizational social psychology and director of Kingston, Ireland. Dr. Miguel, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
How are you feeling today?
Oh, thank you for the invitation, for being your first guest.
Yes.
I'm extremely happy to contribute to your podcast, and hopefully that can be something that contribute to all, not only to all the students, but also wider audiences about these issues, which I do consider important and relevant for today's society.
Oh, amazing. Cool. So we're gonna start from a little bit knowing you about your background and stuff. So obviously you have done your graduation on social psychology. So can you share like what drew you to social psychology?
Yes, that's a good question. It takes me back so many years. As a young student growing up in South America, I was always very eager and very interested to study abroad. So I traveled, or I was allowed to travel by my parents and to come to the UK and study at the London School of Economics.
Wow.
I was very interested in people,
Okay.
communities, and having a better understanding of what they didn't have specifically a theory or concept in mind in those days. So being accepted at one of the top universities in the world was a great honor. So I was really pleased about that. So therefore, I felt that the studies combined with the place where I was kind of cemented more or less my interest in getting to know better about people's lives, people, communities, and so forth. I think that's the reason why I was drawn towards social psychology, and specifically as well, that really was really something that I also found very attractive of it. That the main difference with mainstream psychology was less experimental and brought other fields and social sciences such as sociology and anthropology, and it could also allow me to explore other subjects when I was doing my degree, such as in economic geography, which I really enjoyed, and also related quite a lot to my interest in traveling.
Amazing. That's really interesting. So, obviously, you work for Kingston Ireland. So, what is your vision, or what was your vision when you became the director of Kingston Ireland?
A bit of history about the Kingston iLab. I was working with students in both the International Business Management program here at Kingston and equally our occupational business psychology programs. And with the rapid changes that I could visualize that were taking place in terms of environmental changes, but most relevant, the technological changes, in addition to some of the issues that our societies face, particularly during the financial crisis of 2008, it really was challenging me to think about new ways in which I could encourage students to progress and advance their more conceptual and theoretical ideas in a way that they were applicable to the changes that they were taking place in our societies, particularly at that time as we're expansive and expanding in a global sense. We had lots of students coming from different countries, so it was quite fascinating and interesting to engage them, considering their experiences in these countries, cultural background, and so forth, and trying to think about new ways in which to approach the subject that they were studying. I was already working on leadership, on innovation and creativity. So I thought it was really important to immerse them, and make them more part in terms of designing uh, the uh, the curriculum of what to cover and how to cover it in the classroom. So therefore, students were engaging, like working in mini projects. And developing their own ideas that could address issues like sustainability, issues around financial crisis, or the technological changes, and other issues also faced by organizations. So most students felt empowered, and they felt much more part of it. So the Kingston iLab was born about that experiences of empowering and giving more opportunities to students to take control and self-direct their own learning, with, of course, the support of people like me who have experience and knowledge to support them.
Yeah, I absolutely relate to that because obviously a few weeks back we did a treasure hunting, and it was from the Kingston iLab. That it was really a creative approach outside of the classroom, from the traditional classroom. So it was really a push you beyond your comfort zone and make you think, outside the box. So I can definitely relate to those. Thanks so much for that really good explanation. And okay, Miguel, so we'll jump into your more of creative and social innovation side. So you have this term called barefoot entrepreneurs. This term is fascinating to me. When I was doing research about you, I was trying to find out in Google, and I come up with the article. So can you explain what it means and share an example of it?
Mm. It's really strange to think back, because that research I conducted it many years ago, and obviously that paper is highly influential. It continues to be very influential. But barefoot entrepreneurs started in terms of with a small group of colleagues and researchers, interest in studying people who live in marginal communities in the developing world, such as in places like Brazil, or Argentina, and in Africa, in Zimbabwe or South Africa, and was primarily had to do with looking at the way in which these communities find ways to survive and faced all the challenges that they have, because it feels, or it felt for us, that they've been left behind and outside the mainstream economic and socioeconomic system in their own countries. So these communities have to, in our views, create lots of new forms to challenge their situation and their lives, in order to find ways in which to sustain their lives, which not necessarily reciprocate what is taking place in the mainstream socioeconomic model that we all live by. So I think if I have to define barefoot entrepreneur, it reflects those marginal communities' skills and capacities to face these challenges in order to survive the context and environment that could be seen as challenging, demanding, and quite tough, and reflect that kind of a struggle that people in these communities have to face in order to survive, basically.
Okay, cool. So was it like a research from your university, or it was from your colleague?
No, it's something that we developed with a colleague here at Kingston, one of my PhD students who came from Zimbabwe. And then she was conducted some work in Ghana, in Africa. So we travel to this part of the world. So we get to know the communities and get to know the people inside, and get to have an appreciation about their lives. For instance, you were asking me about an example. One example, for instance, that we saw in Chile, which was very interesting. It was people from a well-off neighborhood had to drive their cars in a rough road outside shantytown, in one of the big cities in the coast. This is in Chile, in South America. And there were lots of potholes on the road. So obviously, for anyone like us, kind of very normal, we wouldn't really think about that potentially. That can have an economic potential. But then there were very poor kids. Most of these kids, sometimes they don't even go to school. But they realized the potential that that road had, and they started to fill the potholes, and they started to charge some money to the cars that were going through, in order to make some few bucks or pounds. And they were able, in that sense, to have enough money to eat that day. So the conditions, in other words, that these people face, make you to perceive and understand your context in a very different way from, let's say, the way we perceive a particular situation or context, whereby we wouldn't think about those things as possibilities. In this case, these kids would. And so there are other examples inside these places, from begging all the way to employing some of their talent to create some craft in order to make enough money, as I said, to survive. So in that sense, that translates a very creative, entrepreneurial kind of behavior. Because they're constantly having to create and recreate something in order to produce enough, in their case, to survive. They may not make profits, but at least at the end of the day, they will be eating, as they wouldn't have the kind of support that you will have in more advanced societies, such as European societies.
No, absolutely. So I'm from Bangladesh, and I think the example you have given, I think I can relate to some of those, because when it is summertime in Bangladesh, Bangladesh is a country of river. There is so many rivers around. So obviously the infrastructure is not very good. So in some of the river, when you're trying to cross, you have to go all the way around. So people would make like wooden bridge, and they would have charged like five taka, which is Bangladeshi money. So 5 taka. So they had this vision, like, okay, I see it, and I'm being an entrepreneur and making this bridge, because it's summertime, not much water.
Exactly. That's a really good, that's a very good example as well, whereby the conditions that the communities face, they force them to come out of their comfort zone, because if they wait for something to be repaired, in this case, to actually someone build a bridge, will not happen. And some people within the community take the opportunity. In other words, it's taking the opportunities and do something about it, rather than sitting and waiting for something that will never happen.
That's really fascinating, and I can absolutely relate to that. Anyway, so move to the next part, which is how do you see communities foster creativity and innovation despite this limited resource? And obviously the example you have given, where we've seen the limited resource and limited potential. So how do you see this community?
It obviously will vary between countries.
Yeah.
I see in Africa where I have had the opportunity to be, uh, particularly in South Africa or in Zimbabwe, where I have been within very, very poor communities.
Yeah.
The struggle that these communities face is enormous, because not only face the challenges they have within those communities. For instance, in some cases, they do not have all the kind of minimum facilities that you will expect to live, such as drinkable water,
Yeah.
accessibility to food. They do face other dangerous things, not
Yeah.
to mention the political context as well, that is extremely challenging. So therefore, coming together as a community
Yeah.
help them quite significantly and substantially to support and reinforce their beliefs, in order to try to overcome all these different challenges.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, being in isolation or working in isolation is something that not necessarily will allow them to succeed
Yeah.
in terms of obtaining the minimum for them to survive. Therefore, I see the role of community, just giving you that example in terms of Africa, but equally in places like Brazil,
Yeah.
where you have shanty towns being built in parts of certain cities. They're extremely difficult and challenging when you imagine in a hill.
Yeah.
So you see all these kind of constructions,
Yeah.
and then you realize that all these constructions, for example, have somehow been able to provide themselves with water,
Yeah.
connect illegally to the electricity system of the city.
Yeah.
You know, it's a way of improvising. You do see there are certain patterns in which communities do come together and somehow they're able to construct, you know, some kind of way of life
Yeah.
that is parallel to the mainstream kind of existence, but somehow allow them for them to recreate some kind of form of living that give them some support and certain comfort in terms of their lives,
Yeah.
but is extremely challenging. So community support is extremely important.
Okay. So if I were to paraphrase in your word, that if there is a limited resource, society sometimes come together and try to navigate through these issues. If
I think if you leave kind of like mainstream politics in some parts of the world, yes, you would see that there is communities that do not collaborate and end up fighting. For example, as you're mentioning, for certain kind of resources, tend to face sometimes more conflictive kind of challenges. And here again, going back to the point of creativity and entrepreneurship, I'm thinking about what happened in a more traditional sense with highly advanced companies. If you focus much more in solving the conflict, you may lose and miss opportunities to actually do something about it, despite the fact that you will have scarce resources. Because obviously you're trying to solve the conflict. So therefore, when communities pull together and help each other, collaborate, in that sense, keep them focused in terms of finding ways of solving the issues that they face rather than getting sidetracked in conflict resolution issues that may not necessarily help them. Okay. So again, collaboration is, I mean, it's one of the key values in every community. Not only that, I mean, that translates quite well in normal organizations, as I say.
Okay, so if I were to say that sometimes solving all the conflicts might be a distraction in terms of your progress, yeah?
Exactly. So you're better off putting all your energy when you don't have much and you don't have much resources in terms of tackling the issues or pulling yourselves together in order to create and produce something that is useful out of that scarcity that they face versus, as I said, being sidetracked in terms of dealing with other issues, social issues, important social issues, but may not necessarily contribute to support and help that community to move forward.
Of course, amazing. So that being said, so we're gonna move to our next question, which is necro entrepreneurship. This is a term you have quite unique terms. Obviously, you have coined. So can you explain this concept and its relevance in today's world?
Yeah, that is really something that relate strongly to particularly the context of um, Africa, in the sense that micro-entrepreneurship was born from the ideas of coming from that someone called Mebembe, working in politics, coined the term of necropolitics, looking at how in some parts of the world almost being alive is like being dead, because you live in such depravity and poverty. You're really left out of the system altogether. So therefore, the term reflects in itself that idea that your life doesn't have any value as such. So it's like being dead, but you're still alive. And in economic sense, someone called Bobby Banerjee then introduced that term to look at particularly again communities which are at the periphery of the mainstream society, in places Africa, or where also research in Latin America, perhaps even Asia, see how these communities have been deprived, particularly as a result of colonialism that took primarily all the resources outside these countries and brought them here to Europe, leaving them in real state of poverty. We used then subsequently, building from those two concepts, to actually build and connect it to necro entrepreneurship, and focusing primarily the way in which colonialism took place in Southern Africa, particularly in South Africa and Zimbabwe, where all the wealth and all the richness of people only benefited Europeans who arrived there, rather than the large majority of individuals. So it's to assert this idea that colonialism has really asserted not only a discourse of power in terms of Europeans colonizing and controlling the society, but also the exploitation and destruction of a way of life that other people had in these parts of the world. So that's how we understand and use Negro entrepreneurism in our studies.
Okay, nice, amazing. I think obviously, as I mentioned, I'm from the Indian subcontinent, and obviously there was colonization as well. And I still believe there are some parts of the Indian subcontinent where there is, because of this extraction of the resource in an extreme level, there are still people are being deprived from many ways to contribute in the politics and other aspects of the society.
I think that's another part of the world that I have not had the chance to visit and participate as such in research. But yes, there you can also build some really good examples where you see the exploitation of people by Europeans, not only the extraction of all the natural resources, but equally exploiting and using the local people almost like slaves. This is obviously looking back historically, but in many ways, in many of parts of the world where large communities, large countries still remain in poverty, you can trace back and reflect back on the impact that colonialism had in those countries. So therefore, somehow still reflect, the imposition and subserving the status that they experience under European colonization. So necro-entrepreneurism does reflect on those kind of issues.
Amazing. So, Miguel, we're gonna move into some more into economic crisis. So, obviously, your research, you have done research in crisis like in Spain, Ireland, and England. What common patterns have you observed, and how do you communicate? How do communities recover through entrepreneurships?
Um, the the experience is particularly in the European context where we conducted research were associated to the big financial crisis that we had in 2008 and impacted quite extensively. In fact, if we think about that crisis, then followed by the COVID crisis, uh, uh, the first crisis in financial terms did produce lots of distress and created lots of anxiety among population because most people lost their jobs, or there was a big sort of collapse of the economic system that forced people who did not have a way of producing or making an income to start their own businesses. So therefore, there, rather than referring to those individuals like we did in the developing world, where they're constantly facing this crisis in these marginal communities as barefoot entrepreneurs, in the European context, was much more like forced entrepreneurs, people who were reluctant to become entrepreneurs, but because they could not receive the social support from governments, they have to do something in order to again survive. So therefore, they were what is called reluctant or forced entrepreneur in those terms. That obviously, when you're faced with a huge crisis that create lots of unemployment, obviously being in this part of the world, in the developed and more advanced world, it does help quite considerable because you still have some support in coming from government in order to help you to at least maintain the minimum standard for you to survive. Having said that, it still was not enough. So people were forced, as I was mentioning, to do something. And what it meant, it was those people to develop initiatives where they could create a way in which they could sustain their lives. That made them more resilient and gave them some strength in terms of trying to escape the condition of suddenly facing unemployment at that stage. Lots of companies simply went bankrupt and collapsed.
So, obviously, you have observed the 2008, 2009, this crisis. Also, you have seen the COVID-19, the pattern. So, do you think that in 2019, after the COVID, we had more support from the government or society than we had in 2008 or 2009 after the crisis?
I think again you have to look at it at different regional parts of the world. Obviously, in Europe and the US, more advanced economies, then you have lots of money poured into societies in order to sustain business and sustain and support people. But at the same time, if in that sense we look at some of the policies introducing then, you realize that societies are facing challenges as a product of government having to spend large amount of money that costs them, in a macroeconomic sense, lots of debts. So that debts obviously have to be repaid. The interest as high as interest rate also was raised. So that created also more poverty. If you take, for example, the UK, we've been going through here what is called a life crisis, in which lots of families and communities face poverty. They need to rely on food banks, for example.
100%.
So there is still problems associated with the kind of measures that were implemented and taken during COVID that even now has a major impact. Now, making a difference between the UK and the rest of Europe, the UK in particular has suffered from the financial crisis, subsequently Brexit, that also had a big impact in society, and then subsequently COVID, that in many ways weakened governments, local governments, in terms of supporting our community. So if we were going to have, and I hope it wouldn't be the case, another big crisis again, the position of most governments around the world will be strenuous, and probably they will struggle in terms of providing the same kind of support that people receive in COVID. Now, obviously, in other parts of the world where there is not that opportunity and possibility, is always very different. There, people have to get whatever in whatever form they want in order to be able to survive. So their experiences are very, very different.
Okay, so I want to highlight that part for the audience, that you mentioned the more support you receive on the crisis, government is bringing money, they are getting into the debt, and it will not have a long-term effect. Am I right?
It will have ultimately a long-term effect, because governments, although they may make the money, but subsequently the money ended up not necessarily in the pocket of people, but ended up in the pocket of organizations that created inflation. So therefore now, despite the fact that some of the economic indices are presenting, well, still there are lots of issues with the way the economies are moving forward. Growth, for example, is something that practically is non-existent. So therefore, there is still stress in society and anxiety when it comes to the way in which the economy is evolving and developing, and therefore that is having a knock-on effect on employment and jobs and so forth. If you think about the cost of living in the UK, it's extremely high, and salaries remain practically low, except in some sectors. But some sectors of the economy have always have always been able to maintain and sustain certain growth, but in the large majority of all the sectors, you do see more people struggling.
100%. Okay, so that being said, we're gonna move to our next questions, which is how do you do the challenges faced by European communities compared with those in Latin America and Africa in terms of fostering innovation?
I think obviously with the globalization, with the global expansion of the economy coming out of the 1980s, we imagine a world where that interconnection existed in terms of the movement of people, the movement of goods all around the world, that could benefit absolutely all our societies. Since the crisis, the financial crisis, and the collapse of the two towers in the US, obviously that drive towards globalization change. So therefore, a fragmentation and the division was created, in which we can see it now with the recent election in the US, where most advanced economy are moving themselves to become more protectionist, and looking inward rather than looking externally. That has created a vacuum in a political and economic sense, and obviously that is having some impact in parts of the world that rely heavily on technological progression, on financial support coming from richer, kind of wealthier sort of countries. Now, when it comes to innovation, you would imagine that countries, as I was saying with the example of small deprived communities in these countries, can pull together and elaborate new alternative ways of reimagining the way in which they survive. When it comes to more political kind of sense, that's more complicated, and more obviously more complex, because we're talking about kind of larger in a territorial kind of sense and in terms of population as well. I see potential parallels. A very I mean, I need to be very careful with the word I use now, but you see on the one hand the big fast development in some parts of the world in a technological sense. In less developed and less privileged areas, you have to imagine that those people there, to a large extent, they don't even have access to certain technology or education and so forth. So you can imagine that those people, they're not only marginal, they're completely out of what is happening and taking place. Now, in a constructive sense, that perhaps will create pocket of possibilities and opportunities. For example, in order to create more protective green economies in all these countries. However, it is a difficult question to answer. See more challenges, but it's very difficult to imagine in the way where we or they will progress in the same way that we see the Western world moving fast with technological changes, however, facing some real challenges at a political kind of level.
Of course, in terms of even if from my understanding, if you see the European countries in terms of internet access, we have like 4G, 5G here. If I were to give an example to my country, there are areas like where there is not even 2G. So we are already limited in terms of getting the vast resource in online, finding out more information and stuff like that. Even in the AI, which you talk about a lot in classes. So, I don't think there are the vast majority of the people are using those networks or those AIs and stuff. So
that's correct. I mean, if you look at, I mean, even in the Western world, not necessarily. If you're highly educated, like in your case, you are aware and you are familiar, and you will be trained, have accessibility not only to knowledge, but also to the technology in order, in your case, to carry on growing and familiarizing more and more with these new technologies and tools that are emerging and will impact work. But in other parts of the world where you have large segments of the population, as you were pointing out, that they don't have access to the knowledge, to the technology, even to the opportunity and possibilities to be trained. That will create big challenges and big questions that associated with the other potential issues that we face, such as the climate crisis, is something that at the moment we are not fully addressing, and it's something that required lots of attention, and require lots of resources to pour in, because it's inevitable. If you leave part of our world behind, it will have some impact and effect subsequently, let's say with migration, if you put it that way, more people moving from certain parts of the world, moving to wealthier kind of areas of the world, such as Europe.
Yeah, that was really well explanation. So we're gonna move to our next and final part of this podcast. So obviously you have a really long career in terms of teaching and stuff, and in terms of research. So in terms of managing student as well and helping to develop, and you had this term called JEBO. Am I right? Am I correct? Yeah, Jebo. Yeah. So, what has been the most impactful aspect of supporting initiative like Jebo, and how do they empower students? Before you jump into the answer, I would say this is you contributing into my podcast is a way you are like kind of empowering me to move to a different aspect of my career, like as example, content creation and podcast. So obviously, I already have the answer for it because you already have this mindset of helping students and trying to push them. And so yeah, for the audience, if you expand on that.
Yeah, Jebo was a lovely initiative started by students, not by us, but obviously influenced by the students who were studying a degree like you in business and management. In their case, was economic management, as how the degree is known at the University of Bologna, where I had the pleasure of being visiting professor. Um, and by their own initiative, they came together and they started to think about how they could develop their own kind of business, what kind of things they could do for businesses, what sort of services they could provide based on the knowledge in marketing, finance, human resource, and management, and so forth. So out of this initiative, they were able to bring academics, people from outside, from businesses and so forth, to support their initiative. So they launched their own kind of business to provide services in marketing and mentoring and other areas of business where they thought they could bring their more young, innovative approaches to help these businesses to expand and increase their profit. So it was really from my part. I was happy to support initiatives like that because I'm a great believer that the current times require a different kind of a student who needs to take initiative and demonstrate more proactive behaviors and take ownership in terms of what they're doing. Because if you're passive today, with all the rapid changes that are taking place, I simply you will remain or you will be left behind. So seeing that happening, empowered and make actually students. It doesn't matter what personality you have, what traits you have, but the fact that you're working with others, really encourage you to come out and see the potential that you have and use all your capacities, knowledge, skills that can be really helpful in the way you move forward and progress in your career. So Jebo was supporting this initiative that young students had in order to advance and progress in their careers by developing their own business and getting a really good insight and understanding of what was not only studying about business, but actually launching their own kind of business.
Well, that's really inspiring. And it really, how do I say, it really gives us the idea that, you start with it and there is support available. And that's obviously in terms of Jabo, what are their current situations?
Well, they still it's going on. They changed the directorship, so I'm not director any longer. But out of Jebo, the idea was that in the same way you have universities here, sometimes the opportunity for some students like you to do a placement in a company. This was their own company where the students did their own placement, and subsequently from there that platform giving them the space for either joining new startup initiatives or, on the other hand, uh, uh, giving them the necessary encouragement for them to start their own businesses. Because some of the issues that sometimes Italian students or students in the UK face is the issue of employment. And sometimes because the employment market is highly the job market, sorry, it's highly competitive. Our students don't have accessibility or the possibility to go into the kind of jobs or business area that they would like to go. So having a space like Jebo allow you to explore, experiment, and subsequently launch yourself if you do have, let's say, some ideas to create new businesses, or go into areas where you will be allowed to carry on experimenting and expanding and evolving as you progress in your new job area, or if it is your own kind of business initiative.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So the next questions we're gonna move into, and that's my personal favorite. Are you a leader? Because in the classes, obviously, we talk about leadership, and for the audience, Miguel is our module leader for leading change, where we learn how to become a leader. So that's my question. Are you a leader?
Very tricky to answer. But if the idea that I'm trying to communicate at the end of the day to all of you, a leader who is much more a supportive person that encourage you, that give you the space and allow you to take risks, to make mistakes, to fail occasionally, but learning to stand up and continue to pursue your dreams, your visions. If it is in that role of more the supportive kind of leader, the understanding kind of leader that is required to take organizations, yes, certainly I can see myself, providing you with that guidance and being that leading figure for all of you to feel comfortable in terms of coming out of your shelf and progressing with your own thoughts and ideas.
And I can be the reference for that, and I truly believe that you are a genuine leader. Okay, so in terms of the leadership, so what one skill or mindset that a student needs today to become an effective leader?
It's more than one, obviously. You need to have that creative mindset, that risk taking, being very, very proactive, being much in contact with your emotions. That's really essential. It will define you as a human being, having emotions, being able to have empathy in order to create really strong bonding relationships with the people that you are going to work. Those I will, and then obviously that help with collaboration and so forth, but those I will emphasize and highlight as extremely important. Having the capacity to create, to take risk, because that will imply that you can cope and deal with failure. Being resilient is really important, but having this understanding of your emotional, not be afraid of showing your emotions.
Amazing. So the next question is AI. So you are really active in terms of AI. You use Copilot and all of that, and also you do encourage us as well to use it, especially Copilot. So my thing is, do you think that AI will help us to become a leader, or do you think a leader can use AI to be more effective?
I think AI, with the way in which the technology is progressing, I mean, now we're still at the early stages of this revolution, but it's progressing extremely quickly. It will not help you as a human being per se. So it's still you need to rely on other humans for you to experience not only work but life in itself. I can see the constructive and positive side of AI as a way of helping you in certain tasks. However, you always have to be slightly skeptical about the employment of these technologies, because if people rely too heavily on them, that will remove you from the need of you making the kind of contribution that, in my view, you will have to make in order for you to have a life and existence. With AI, we're talking about the kind of life that you want for you that will imply having a job or being part of an organization or a community and so forth. But because it will have a kind of global sort of impact in all of our existence, already is having it. So I see it, as I said, use it with care and have a very good understanding of where you stand. But if you start relying too much on the technology, then obviously the technology will be able to, it's learning at the moment. It has the capacity to learn as it progresses faster and faster. It will be able to do more things in the same way that we do. So identifying with clarity where are the areas where we need to protect ourselves, in order to protect life, is extremely important and relevant. So I see it potentially as a constructive helping tool, but on the other hand, it can be also potential threat in terms of a way of life.
Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, so obviously we have been talking for more than an hour. So we're gonna jump into our conclusion. So if we're gonna do a rapid fire round. Right. And also we do have like two closing questions. So I want you to answer it in very few words.
Okay.
So from your perspective, if you could leave one piece of advice about creativity or entrepreneurship with the audience, what would it be?
Be bold.
What is next for you? Like, what's your next step in terms of work? Obviously, you have been to so many countries and done so many research. So, what's next ahead for you?
Rethinking the meaning of work.
Okay. Amazing. Okay, cool. So now we're gonna jump into the rapid fire questions. So I want you to answer very quickly. Describe yourself in 3 words.
Bold, risk seeker, and happy.
Happy. Okay. What is your go-to productive tips?
What is my?
So, what is your go-to productivity tip?
Be very focused and disciplined.
Okay. One book or resource you think everyone should read?
Oh gosh, that is really, because it's read everything that you find interesting.
Interesting. Okay. If you could work on any research topic outside your field, what would it be?
AI.
AI. What's the most inspiring place you have visited and why?
Oof. Zimbabwe, very deprived communities. Extremely inspiring to meet people there.
Okay. A project or achievement you are most proud of?
Working with these deprived communities.
Okay. One piece of advice you would have give your younger self. Sorry.
Search bigger waves.
Okay, amazing. So that was end of our rapid fire sections. I would like to say thanks to you, Miguel, for your time. It's been like, obviously I took 1.5 hours from you. And yeah, I really appreciate that you agreed to come to my podcast and be my very first guest. And yeah, it's been a great experience, and I've taken so much things from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed.
Thank you.